All right, so today, with the Rivers Coalition, we have some special presentation coming up by Drew Bartlett at the district. But before we get started with that and the rest of our exciting agenda today, I'd like to ask you to stand and help and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
We need to ask everybody to mute at home, please.
Yeah, if you're on, please mute your phone and your speakers. So we don't have a speaker. Can we fix it now? Turn the speakers and the mics off. Yep. It's kind of hard to do, but we're ready to go. So basically my comments and to get us started and stuff are, we're regularly meeting as a board of directors. We're regularly going through the programs and coming up, but also a lot of other things and issues that come up and what the coalition might do to in response to that. We had some discussion about the Clean Water Act, for instance, had a 50th anniversary just this last week, and the 18th was the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, where all of us who were there in 1972 thought that once the act was passed, hey, the water's going to be clean next year. So that didn't quite happen, and we're still working on it. So a lot of us are passing resolutions. A lot of our organizations are getting involved all during this month to try to bring awareness to the fact that we still need to enforce the Clean Water Act. And before I present our speaker for today, I think we're seeing some recovery going on in the West Coast. And I want us all to keep in mind those friends and family and folks that are over there on the West Coast. I've spoken with James Evans, for instance, and others, Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation and Bing Darling and all those folks that are over there on the West Coast who got terribly inundated by the storm surge. I know you've all seen the videos and had damage. Maybe some of us have helped even to go over there and help give that relief, but whatever we can do to help out in those situations, it's going to take a long, long time to recover from all that damage. We're very fortunate we didn't catch that, but water quality here dropped a bit because of the major amounts of runoff, but nothing compared to what devastation happened over there. So let's keep that in mind. Before we introduce, I think Jackie would like to say a word too. So Jackie, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Jackie Thurlow-Lippisch, your present governing board member for the South Florida Water Management District. I just wanted to take a minute before our speakers come forward to let everybody know how wonderful it is to have the speakers that we have today. Drew Bartlett, our executive director for the South Florida Water Management District, John Mitnick, the man behind the curtain, keeping the whole thing together, our deputy director, and Miss Anna, say your last name for me? Wachnika, I should be able to say that with a German background. And she is a special doctor with special information today. When I heard that Drew was going to speak, it was during the whole intensity of the Hurricane Ian. And I thought to myself, how is he going to speak? I mean, they're trying to hold the world together, but he said yes. During that time, I'm sure his wife had not seen him. I'm sure they had been activated, the district, for weeks. I mean, I just want all of us to know what a special time it is that the South Florida Water Management District makes the time to come in the most difficult times. And I want my staff to know how much I appreciate them. Please give Drew Bartlett a warm round of applause.
So to introduce Drew, I've known Drew for quite a long time, and I won't go into a lot of those stories, but he's been with this water issues for many, many years, over 17 years prior to him coming on basically on the board at DEP. He was with Florida DEP for many years prior to being on the executive director starting in April of 19. So at that time, as you recall, we had a whole new governing board, water management district, and now a new executive director. So he's done a lot to kind of pull everything together. We do, as Jackie said, appreciate him coming today and addressing the critical question we have, which is that basically, the lake is high. It's gone high because of definitely the levels are getting high because of all the.
Oh my gosh.
I saw over about 29,000 or 30,000 CFS coming in at one time. And that was just from the S65E. It was just from Kissimmee, but Istapoga, Fish Eating Creek, all these inflows to the lake were from all that rain and runoff coming through the watershed. It was amazing. So the lake has gone up, and now we're getting into the dry season now, starting in November through May. And so through April. So we're gonna be in that dry season where we only get about 2 to 2.5 inches a month for these next several months, opposed to 6 or 8 inches a month during a wet season from May through October. So Drew, I'm going to turn it over to you and help fill us in.
All right. Thank you, Mark. And thanks for having me, everyone. And I know when I get invitations to come out and speak to folks that are as engaged as this crowd, I look for every opportunity to say yes, because it is Colonel Polk. I didn't see you. Thanks for being here. It's a great group you have here. It makes a difference. And I just, it's a real privilege for me, honestly, to talk to you. So thanks for inviting me. Eve Samples invited me, and thank you, Eve, for that invitation. It's been a heck of a few weeks. What I want to do is, so I have bought Dr. Wachnika. She didn't know she was coming until late yesterday. But she briefed me on the condition of the lake yesterday, and I thought, this is gold. I think you should present it to the Rivers Coalition. So she'll come up at part, and then I'll come back up and finish it out. But the big difference maker and why I'm here is because Hurricane Ian changed the lake. It changed what's going on in the lake. It changed what's going on in the district to a great degree. And it really all starts with, drum roll, please. This suddenly isn't working. At the projector, that way. The ceiling, that way. Did you do that?
I did. I just pointed it toward. Push the arrow.
Okay.
You try.
Skills developed. All right. So when it comes to Hurricane Ian and when it comes to Lake Okeechobee and that system, it's really rainfall we're talking about. It's not the wind and the storm surge, which really devastated the Southwest coast. And we did have a lot of activities over there that we're still implementing for the Southwest coast regarding debris removal. And our flood control system over there has got the storm surge, all the salinity control structures were completely overtopped. But it's all recovered as far as the flood control system goes on the Southwest coast. But when it comes to rainfall, this was the 3-day event, right? And so what you have on this side is 3 days of rain. That's our rain, or what we call our raindar, which you can pull up on our internet site. And everywhere where it's dark reds, it's up into 6 to 8 inches of rain in those 3 days, which is a heck of a lot of rain. And so you can see with the original bands and everything that Ian was brought, and you remember that night where it rained all night, and that's where it dropped all this rain on the southern part. And part of that rainfall, so we had a lot of flood control operations going on around the East Coast, which was moving a lot of water away from communities. There was localized flooding events, but nothing dramatic like I will talk about in a minute. The other part where we got a lot of rain, which I know interests this community, is the Everglades agricultural area. And so you can see in that 3-day event, you had just an incredible amount of rain, up to 8-9 inches throughout the entire basin. And sure. One, two. So that is a 3-day. Yeah. Isn't that right, John, or is it 4? Yeah. 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 Sorry about that. Yeah, midnight. Yeah. Okay. And I wasn't looking up there. I was looking over here down at the hydrograph. Right. So so that's the amount of rain. And so when we get that amount of rain in the Everglades agricultural area, obviously with all flood control operations, we move all that water to the stormwater treatment areas and our storage features in the Everglades agricultural area. But when we get an intense rain like that, we can't control the canal levels with just that pumping alone. And so you may have heard that we did have to implement some flood control operations in this area, which was back pumping into the lake. And so that's what this graph is. And that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days that we had to use back pumps. And the reason we have to use those back pumps is it all responds to the canals. We have 3 or 4 major canals that go through the EAA that receive all that rainwater into those canals. And the 4 cities, Pahokee, Belglade, South Bay, their flood control systems are gravity drained. And so they don't have pumps for those flood control systems. So if the canal levels get too high, it backs up into those communities and it ends up flooding those communities. So in order to keep, with so much rain, in order to keep those canals down with all the rainwater coming into them, we had to use additional pumps to keep those canals under control. Now we monitored it very closely and we turned them off as soon as we could once we had gone through the height of all of that flood control operation, the peak of it. And that full pumping amounted to about, and I know this is a very educated community, it's about 25,000 acre feet of water was pumped back into the lake with those back pumps. That's the first time we've used those back pumps since Irma. So that's, it really is. We've gotten to where we only need to use them in these extreme types of events for those flood control operations. But otherwise, so Irma and then Ian. So I know that was a question that this community had, but that's the operations of those back pumps. So moving up to the north, you see now we're getting into purples and magentas, I don't know, up here where we have an extreme amount of rain. And this is closer to the 1 in 200 year storm event. And that's where a lot of the attention of the district was focused on flood control with those communities. And there's a flood control system up there is built for 1 in 10 year storm event. And we're upwards of 100 and 1 in 200 year storm event, depending on the community. So this is what we were facing. These are the neighborhoods that were flooded from that intense rainfall. Down here, this is a street, not a canal or a river. Obviously, you see this is around Lake Mary Jane. This is around Lake AJ. There were lakes up here that I learned about that I didn't know existed. But it was an incredible amount of rain, and it was specifically up in this area. This is where we got the intense rainfall right up in here. It actually goes up into St. Johns River. And so it was these lake systems here that really got the brunt of the rain. And you have uncontrolled flows coming down from rivers up here. And then you have movement of water between lakes. And so this is the hydrographs. Basically, it says time, and then a lake level is the squiggly line. And where you want the lake to be is where that line is. That's the Corps of Engineers regulation schedule. And so you can see in some areas, Lake Hart, that's Mary Jane here, but this is the lake where you saw the woman's house, right? And then you had AJ, let's see, this is East Toho, and AJ, and there's a Fells Cove right in there. That's where you saw these neighborhoods over here. So that area specifically was extremely wet and flooded. And so so we had to, it went up and we had to get it back down. So the one thing that I have learned about the South Florida Water Management District is that when crises happen, we can act extremely fast. So the operations that we had was usually this is the top of the system, all right? This is the Upper Kissimmee chain of lakes. This flows up into Myrtle, flows up into Mary Jane Hart, and then around down through Toho and down this way. Well, since this area got all the rain, basically we had to reverse the flows to come back down southward from that structure southward. And so that involved pumps here and pumps here, right here and here, a massive amount of pumps. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pumps out of East Lake Toho and 9 pumps out of Lake Myrtle, all there roaring. And that's where you see this. This is 9 pumps all just roaring over that structure. And there's a gravity structure there that's doing what it can, but we had pumps trying to pull that water down from those flooded conditions and basically make its way down this system where it didn't rain quite as hard. So you can see, let me go back. You can see as closer you got to the lake, the less rain it had. So there was some room where we could move water away from those flooded communities and into areas where it could take it. Now, obviously this got way above where it should be. Every lake up here got way above where it should be. So right now you can see we're in a much better position. We're back down towards the winter pool, except up here in Lake Myrtle, which we're still working on getting down. So we are, and so that all that water basically put 789,000 acre feet of rainfall in the Upper Kissimmee chain of lakes. And I think this crowd speaks acre feet. Am I right? Okay. So that's a lot of water to date. And so as we moved it away from those communities and out Lake Kissimmee, everyone knows where that's headed, Lake Okeechobee. So far, we've moved about 600,000 acre feet out of Lake Kissimmee. And that's because not all of it's going to come to the lake, right? We can hold it in those lakes, evaporation, it soaks in, the plants take it up, people use it. So it doesn't all come down. But that's the amount of acre feet of rainfall that we calculated for this basin up here, this entire basin. And so then it goes to the river. And this was the big test. This was the big test for the Kissimmee River. So what you can see here is before the hurricane, we had some rain in September. And so the floodplain was filling up. But after the hurricane, it went bank to bank. Very, very wet floodplain. At the end of the restoration project is this weir, which is a system that's basically, it rises it up for the restoration, then it flows over it as a waterfall type of system. Right, so you might recall that the Kissimmee River was a canal. It was made into a canal in the 50s or 60s for, flood control and navigation. And the restoration project was authorized in the 80s to put the floodplain back together, put the wiggle back in, right? And so that was just finished, about 2 years ago. And last August. Okay, a year and a quarter. Yeah. So it was, so now it's here, and there are communities up and down this area here that were like, okay, what's going on? This is a lot of rain coming down this way, and is this going to work with this weir? And there's a community right there on that weir, and they were protected. They did not get flooded. So the river filled up. It did its restoration work. I spent a lot of time in the chopper going back and forth to Osceola County during this event, and I got to see that in all its glory. And it's a sight to behold, that restoration project. And, as we all kind of are aware, we were in a dry condition before the hurricane. And so that was, this kind of inundation on the floodplain will help with birds and prey productivity and spawning of fish and so forth. And so during this dry season, if you can visit this area, you'll probably have some sights to take in with flocks of birds and nesting and so forth in this area. It's really set it up well. So, and then of course, all this eventually makes its way down to the Lake Okeechobee. We basically during the peak of the operations, we had about 13,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, coming out of Lake Kissimmee, and then about 13,000 going into Lake Okeechobee. We're down to about 2,500 CFS coming out of Lake Kissimmee, and the floodplain is now lowering. It's at about 8,000 CFS coming into Lake Okeechobee. Assuming everyone speaks CFS here, maybe you have that relative. That's a lot of water. But it's coming down. We're not putting, now the lakes have stabilized, so we don't have to put as much into the Kissimmee River, and therefore it can recede and put less into Lake Okeechobee. So as I go into Lake Okeechobee, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Wachnika, who is going to is a lot smarter than I am, and can really fill you in on what's going on in the lake.
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start with algal bloom potential on the lake. So those maps that you see here on the slide are NOAA products, and we use them on daily basis to track the location and extent of the blooms on the lake. So they're very useful. And the colors that you see on the maps indicate how intense the blooms are. So the redder the colors, the more intense the blooms, and the bluer the colors, that would indicate very low to low bloom potential. So if you see greenish or yellowish colors, that would indicate medium to high bloom potential on the lake. So the map in the middle shows basically that at this moment on October 25th, so 2 days ago, the bloom potential was very, very low. And in actually most part of the lake, especially in that central part of the lake, where turbidity right now is very high, the bloom potential is pretty much non-existing. So I would say that lake is pretty much bloom-free at this moment. And I will explain why in a second. So the maps on the left indicate the bloom conditions prior to the hurricane, and then during the hurricane and directly after the hurricane. So you can see on September 25th, on Sunday prior to the hurricane, we still had medium to high bloom potential in that northwestern, northeastern, and southeastern part of the lake. After the hurricane, like day or two after the hurricane, because we had such a strong wind blowing from the south, that biomass was pushed towards the northern part and northwestern part of the lake. And that's where you see bloom accumulating on September 30th. So 1 or 2 days after the hurricane passed just north of Lake Okeechobee. And over time, when you switch to the right side of the slide, you can clearly see that the blooms were slowly dissipating. And this is because the water conditions were changing. The increased turbidity pretty much inhibited algal growth within the lake. So let's move to the next slide. Let's look at the wind patterns. So the wind roses on top of this part of the slide basically show the conditions right before the hurricane. So that's Monday before the hurricane. So basically the colors indicate different wind speed categories. And on the graph, you can additionally see that prior to the hurricane, we had pretty calm winds, some fluctuations caused by differences between night and pressure between night and day, and differences in temperature. So that will generate stronger and then weaker winds during the night time, and slightly stronger during the daytime due to the temperature pressure differences between land and the lake. And on Tuesday, you already can see that the more greenish colors. So that means that the wind speeds increased to more than 15 miles per hour. And at night on September 28th and early morning on September 29th, the wind speeds increased to up to 51 miles per hour, with wind gusts reaching 61 miles per hour. So that's the peak that you can see right here. With a hurricane, also the lake received a lot of precipitation, just like Drew said before, we received a lot of precipitation north of the lake, but also over the lake. And after the hurricane went farther to the northeast, that counterclockwise circulation basically changed wind direction to northerly winds. And with those northerly winds, the colder air from up north came to South Florida. So you probably noticed that cooler temperatures right after the hurricane. So that was due not only to the wind effect and precipitation, but also to those that counterclockwise circulation dragging colder air from up north. And you will see it. What effect did it have on surface water temperature in the lake? And after the hurricane, you can see that conditions stabilized. We still had winds coming from northwest and later from northeast. And that was the pattern a few days after the hurricane. And you can see that the wind speeds clearly went down, and the precipitation pretty much stopped a few days after the hurricane. Okay, so let's look at the lake stages. So what happened when the wind started blowing from the south? As you can see, the stages changed significantly, but they changed differently in the northern part of the lake and the southern part of the lake. So those are the lake stage monitoring stations, and that northern part of the lake experienced up to 6 feet increase in stages, while southern part of the lake experienced decreases of up to 3 feet in lake stages. So where's this difference coming from, 3 versus 6? So basically, if you think about the southern part of the lake, so when winds came on the 28th and 29th from the south east direction, the southern direction, that pushed water towards the northern part of the lakes. That's where the water was accumulating. But at the same time, we experienced unprecedented increases in combined inflows from all the canals. So all the water was basically draining, and the canals were basically delivering water into the lake. So, and on top of that, we had precipitation. So all of those different sources of water combined created those unprecedented conditions in northern part of the lake. And the southern part of the lake, the bottom was pretty much exposed in many parts of the lake. And our scientists, actually from our section, flew over the lake a few days after the hurricane, and they observed some fish kills. But it wasn't because of the low DO, that's the usual suspect, because the water column was pretty much well mixed, so it was well oxygenated. The fish most likely got stranded when the water got pushed to the north. So they just didn't have enough time to escape and pretty much died there in some areas of the lake. So we did observe that after the hurricane. Okay, so let's look at the inflows and stages. As Drew mentioned before, the lake experienced unprecedented increases in total average inflows from all the sources, all different canals in the northern part of the system. So you can see that we already observed some increases in total inflows prior to the hurricane. So we're preparing for the hurricane. And we also had some precipitation. So that basically resulted in higher inflows into the lake. But the few days after the hurricane, we experienced practically the maximum inflows exceeding 21,000 cubic feet per second. So that's the combined daily average inflows from all those different sources. And then over time, as you can see on this graph, the inflows slowly start decreasing. But the stage, that's the broken blue line over here, did not. So the stages kept increasing while the inflows were slowly decreasing. So what's the reason for that? So basically what is happening, we didn't release water for a few weeks. So that means that we're getting water in, but the water was not getting out of the lake. So basically that resulted in unprecedented increase in stages, even though the inflows were slowly decreasing. And you can see that's the stage increase and slow decrease in inflows over time after the hurricane passed over north of Lake Okeechobee. Okay, so let's talk about the impact of winds and precipitation and those inflows on surface water temperature. So the colder air after the hurricane, all the inflows and precipitation resulted in a drop in surface water temperature. So this data is in degrees Celsius, and the pink zone over here, that's the basically those are temperatures that are optimal for cyanobacterial growth. So as you know, cyanos like warm water. So they love when the water exceeds 25 centigrades. And so basically we had temperatures close to 30, which are optimal for cyanobacterial growth. That's why we had blooms on the lake prior to the storm. But after the storm, the surface water temperature dropped because of precipitation, wind, effect, and also inflows and cold air coming from the north. And then the conditions pretty much stabilized a little bit. Air temperature got higher, and that obviously resulted in higher surface water temperature, but then the cold fronts came. And again, we had a drop in surface water temperature to below that optimal temperature zone. So now we are below, all the stations indicate that the temperatures are below 25 Celsius. So we have 6 continuous monitoring stations in the lake. So this is basically the data are coming from the continuous monitoring stations. And this is the latest data from our routine monitoring of water quality and phytoplankton on the lake. So the latest survey we completed was in mid-October. So this is basically the data from that survey. So just as a reminder, we collect data from 32 stations on the lake twice per month during the wet season and once during the dry season. It's a very typical monitoring pattern for any aquatic systems. So from November, we'll be switching to monthly monitoring. But this is the last of the wet season completed in mid-October. And you can see that the stations in that central part of the lake show lower temperatures than the stations in near-shore areas. So, and this is also very typical because water absorbs heat slower than air, right? So air warms up quicker than water. And the shallower the water, the quicker it will absorb the heat. So that's why you observe this pattern in nearshore areas which are shallower, that littoral zone, especially in that western part of the lake, southern part of the lake, has higher surface water temperatures right now than that central pelagic zone. So it's those are basically the sites that are much deeper than compared to the littoral zone. So there are some spatial differences in surface water temperatures across the lake right now. The strong winds after the hurricane also significantly increased turbidity. So this is the 2-year data, turbidity data, so you can clearly see that significant increase right after the hurricane. So this is early results from the early October survey and late October survey. So you can clearly see that increase. And you can compare it to the last year conditions at the same time of the year. So you can clearly see huge difference between the turbidity levels. And again, the latest results from our mid-October survey indicate that the south central part of the lake experienced the highest turbidity levels. And this is simply because in that part of the lake, we have pretty much unconsolidated sediments on top. And any wind speed, especially the hurricanes, will disturb those sediments easily. And that was observed during Irma and also during 2004, 5, and 6 hurricanes, where turbidity actually stayed elevated for a few years. So we don't know how long the turbidity will stay elevated like that after Ian, but we definitely should expect elevated turbidity level, especially in this part of the lake where we have unconsolidated sediments for at least several weeks in the future. And what does that? What effect does it have on phytoplankton? Well, basically that higher turbidity means less light in the water. So let's switch to another slide. So this slide basically is about water transparency. So again, 2 years of data, you can see that right after the hurricane, transparency dropped significantly, right? And so you can compare last year versus this year. So you can clearly see that effect of hurricane on water transparency. And this is basically because we have so much organic and inorganic material in a water column that basically decreases availability of light to phytoplankton, which inhibits their growth. So this is one of the reasons why we also have much lower phytoplankton biomass on a lake right now. It's many different things, unfavorable temperature conditions, unfavorable light conditions. So even though we receive a lot of nutrients with the water coming from the upper part of the systems, right now the conditions are just not right for phytoplankton to bloom. But with that influx of nutrients from upper part of the system, we most likely should expect and should prepare for the next year bloom season, which most likely will be quite intense because of all the nutrients getting into the lake and just sitting there, and the phytoplankton is just waiting for optimal conditions to occur. So as soon as that transparency will improve and water temperatures will increase, there are plenty of nutrients. Especially what's important for cyanobacteria especially is nitrogen. They love nitrogen. So once all those conditions align and the conditions will become optimal, that's when we will expect most likely intense bloom in the upcoming bloom season. So we should be ready for that. So here on this map, I compared before and after conditions. So blue bars indicate water transparency prior to the hurricane, and the brown bars indicate conditions after. So you can see that basically across the lake at most of the locations, water transparency significantly got worse after the hurricane. And this is because of the increased turbidity. So one last slide that I have is about the total microcystins. Those are the toxins that are often recorded or detected on the lake. And the major microcystins producer is Microcystis aeruginosa, which I'm sure everyone knows that species by now. So it's a species that has potential for producing toxins, and that toxins microcystins. But this year was actually pretty good in terms of toxins in the lake. The blooms, we had blooms, but the blooms were much less toxic. So those are results from our latest 2 surveys. So basically at all locations, the microcystin concentrations were below detection limit. So pretty much there were no toxins in the water when we're sampling in early and mid-October. Now, so this is the comparison between wet season 2021 and wet season 2022. So you also can see that the number of the percentage of sites in which we detected toxins was significantly lower. So we detected toxins only in 15% of samples that we collected during the 2022 wet season, compared to 59% of samples in 2021 wet season. So there's a huge difference between those 2 wet seasons. And on this graph, 1 and 2 means early and mid-month sampling. So like I mentioned earlier, we sampled twice per month during the wet season. So basically you can see that last year, we already detected toxins in more than 90% of the samples that we collected from the lake. So at the beginning of May and in mid-May. And this year, we only had 6% of the samples, which basically, that would be like 2 sites out of 32. So you can clearly see that we had toxins present in water much earlier last year compared to this year. And for the last 5 consecutive sampling events, we did not detect any microcystins in the water. Everything was below detection limit. So we basically didn't have any microcystins in the water since mid August. And if you compare it, the orange bars are results from 2021 bloom season. So you can see that we had toxins in between 27 to up to 90% of the samples still in September and October. While this season, we didn't detect any microcysteine since mid-August. So in summary, I would say that Hurricane Ian and associated changes in water quality plus lower temperatures pretty much killed the blooms this season. So at this moment, because of unfavorable conditions for their growth, there aren't any blooms on the lake. There are some elevated biomass at some locations, but there are no toxins, and the blooms are really insignificant compared to what we experienced last year. And I will turn it back to Drew. Thank you.
Told you she was smarter than me. All right. All right, another topic of conversation is really what about the SDAs? How did they fare? And how will they fare during the dry season when there's an interest in moving a lot of the lake water south, particularly given the lake level as it is right now. So what we have here is, so really the two SDAs that are most suitable for moving lake water south is SDA 2 and SDA 3-4. And so what you have here is right at the peak of the hurricane and the water getting from the EAA getting delivered to these SDAs, you have really wet conditions. This is under construction. This flowway right here is under construction, and this flowway right here is under rehabilitation. And basically water moves through it like this, down these flowways. This one's this way, this one's this way. But anyway, you get the idea. And so what happened during the hurricane is they got really full. And that's this peak right here. So this is the summer, right? This is the summer wet season depth of this cell right here, which is a workhorse cell for us. This is where we want that for the optimal plant health, and the health of the STA. And Ian took it up to 5 feet, and this is 1.5 feet. So that was how deep it got. Now, and as of the 20th, we've been able to bring those back down to a more manageable condition, in the, basically 2.5 foot range or lower, which is great. That's where we want it. We're still bringing them down to try to get them ready for movement of lake water or rains or whatever during the dry season. But right now they're wet, right? They're not exactly where we want them to be. And this conversation is, we always had this conversation about the health of the plants, right? Because we need the plants to be healthy so we can have them remove the phosphorus. What is not good for plants is deep water. And so this wet season, we had 2 events where we had deep water. In June, it rained like heck for some reason in the Everglades agricultural area. We just have those anomalies happen. And we filled up the A1 FEB or whatever storage device, we filled them up completely. And so then we had to just move all that water into the STAs. And so they all filled up tremendously. And so that happened twice this wet season. So our scientists are out there assessing the plants. Did they get damaged? That kind of stuff so that we can know how best to manage them as we go through the wet season. But that's where we are right now. And that's what we're looking at. I need to start, telling everybody that right now, I'm worried about the plants. And the reason I'm worried about the plants is because starting in around 2025, I have to meet a phosphorus number coming out of the bottom of these STAs at the outflow of these STAs of 13. Some of them are achieving it, some of them are not. The more I load into them, the more risk I am of achieving them, the less healthy the plant, the less chance we have of achieving that regulatory number. And that's a regulatory number with court oversight and all kinds of deals. So in 2025, while I'm standing here talking to you about plant health and these things, now I'm talking about plant health. In 2025, I'll start talking about loading and phosphorus and all kinds of other variables that we'll have to keep in mind as we move water through these stormwater treatment areas. So I want good, healthy plants in 2025. That doesn't mean we're not going to move lake water through these. Sometimes you need to move lake water through these to have healthy plants. So it's a management decisions that we have to make weekly, daily at the water management district. But right now, the levels are coming down. So we're getting them into a position to where they can take lake water. Could they take lake water now? Possibly. Right now, Water Conservation Area 3A is above its schedule. So the rules of the game are not to move lake water into it. You know, if we had a flooding condition in the lake or a threatening condition in the lake, we would still do that. But right now, it's above schedule. So the recommendations would be not to move lake water into it. These are the hydrographs of the Everglades, essentially. As we were finishing up the dry season, we were worried about drought, and we were worried about getting through the dry season, which is projected as a La Nina season, and worrying about peat fires in the Everglades, right? So we're not in that condition anymore. Ian dropped a lot of rain. Now we're set up very nicely with respect to the regulation schedule to have a good, nice recession in the conservation areas, probably have good birding numbers, bird nesting numbers in the conservation areas because we were able to fill it up, which helps with prey production for the birds in the conservation areas. We have a whole new system now where we can move water out of Conservation Area 3 through the park. So, you know, that helps us manage this level of Water Conservation Area 3A, which is where you would move lake water. So Ian did a good job in the Everglades. I mean, it really needed Ian. And so it's set up right where we need it to be from an ecologic standpoint. Okay, so let's talk about what we all want to talk about, which is Lake Okeechobee and where we are on Lake Okeechobee. So the way you read this, the red line, the thick red line is this year, and this is where we are, I think, as of yesterday or the day before, just above the ecologic band. This gray area is the lake's ecologic envelope. So as far as Losum and Loers go, Loers would have discharges going on right now. Losum, you'd be about a foot from the BC band under Losum. We've certainly been working with the Corps of Engineers. While we were in that condition last week, they decided not to release any water. That was certainly, we were in line with that. Given the inflows, given the forecast, just so you know, over the next week, very dry. For the dry season, we're expecting a La Nina condition, which is drier than normal condition for the dry season. So as we're having these conversations and with the less water coming in, we're actually doing water supply deliveries and deliveries to we're talking about deliveries to the Caloosahatchee for environmental deliveries right now. With those deliveries and the less water coming in, we're thinking that this may peak out just about where it was last year, which is around 16 feet plus or minus, depending on conditions. So if we can repeat last year we did not have discharges, right? And last year we were able to use beneficial deliveries for water supply for the environment and people to bring it down into the ecologic zone last year. So that was this blue line here. So we were able to bring it down with beneficial deliveries such that we basically tracked the ecologic zone coming down. And our management protocol, what we were trying to achieve last year was to get it down here and just basically try to mimic that envelope for the lake. There's no discharges, the water supply is fine. Everything, you know, pretty much works out if you just stay in that ecologic zone. Mother Nature won't let you. But that's, you know, when you're trying to make decisions, you try. And then we had those, what I talked about, those June rains brought it back out. But then, as everyone knows, we had a dry, wet season. So these operations where we worked with the Corps to provide a lot of beneficial deliveries, we sent water to the Everglades and to the Caloosahatchee. That resulted, if you had just straight followed Loers, you know, the lake would have ended up higher than it is right now. Some calculations, it's between a half a foot and a foot on where the lake would have ended up if we had not provided those beneficial deliveries. And so that would put you up a higher here, right? If we had not done that. And you would be definitely in a discharge situation if we hadn't worked with the Corps to provide those deliveries and track this down. So right now, the outlook is very dry. The long seasonal outlook is very dry. So with beneficial deliveries and with less flows coming in, right now we're thinking we can get through this without discharges, which is great. And then we can have water to help the Everglades and everything through the dry season. So one thing I wanted to leave with. All right. One more slide. There we go. I didn't mean to do that. We could go to the last slide. That's it. Yep. Thank you. So this is the St. Lucie estuary and the oyster condition on the St. Lucie estuary. And so what you have here is the inflows to the St. Lucie estuary and been able to, this is for 2 years, this is for 3 years. So the scale's not exactly the same, but we've been able to avoid those lake discharges. It's been basin. The climate has been somewhat cooperative on how much water has been delivered to this area. And so this is the oyster bed, Rio oyster bed, and this is spat production in the oysters. And so 2 years ago, you had this kind of spat production in the St. Lucie estuary. Last year, you had this kind of spat production, which Lawrence would tell you is bimodal, which is you have the most here, then you have a couple months off, and then you have another peak. And this is how it's setting up this year. You've had the early mode, have a lot of spat production. We're in the middle mode, which is more like this area here, where it's lesser, and we're still collecting data to see if we have another jump here. But the control of the waters, the control of Lake Okeechobee has really benefited the oysters in St. Lucie estuary. So I got to get in front of Lawrence's ecosystem update for next board meeting and spread this news to this area. So anyway, that's kind of exciting for us environmentalists to see. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
For a question. I'm gonna just start, and I'm glad you put up that graph. One of the things that you saw in that biannual peak, is that oysters were waiting for another spawn to occur in November, around November time. So if we're talking about the periodic science call, they just talked about what are some options to getting water out of the lake and making releases to the estuaries, both east and west. And they gave us kind of options of, 3,000 to the west and 1,170 to the east. And, when would be a good time to do that and everything. And because of that bimodal happening soon, it would be detrimental if we had a freshwater system coming during a spawning of an oyster event. So one of the concerns is, yes, we're all about, and I think you heard on the periodic science call, we need to put the water south, and the kind of the title of today's talk kind of looking at, can't we, yes, the STAs have been under a lot of stress. Yes, we got to get them down. We got to get that water. And 3A is water conservation area is pretty high, but we still need to get that water moving south. The S12s are open under Tamiami. We are moving water under the trail. We are moving water out of the system as well through Everglades National Park. The question begins, we did a lot of basin runoff into those STAs during the storm event. They're now those canals are down at 10.5 feet or 9 point something feet. Actually, we need to start moving that water. If you got to move the water out of the lake, and if the decision's made, we can't wait longer into the dry season, we might need to release some. Why can't we put some more through the STAs and down to the south?
Yep. Thank you, Mark. And that really, that is why our teams are out looking at the plant health, right? Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So that is, trust me, we are motivated to move water south. We definitely are. We have south, we have water supply, and we have Caloosahatchee estuary. And so we look at all three. We look at forecast. the one thing we know is we don't want any harmful discharges, right, to the estuaries, either estuary, we don't want harmful discharges. We're looking at that lake. We think we can get through this without harmful discharges, given the forecast that we have. But that doesn't mean we don't stop looking for those opportunities to move that water through the STAs. It's a constant battle rhythm at the Water Management District, working with the scientists who are trying to get those STAs in a position to function when the consent decree hits. And so, you know, it's a push. I mean, it is something that we work on every week. And you know, it is something where we say, all right, we're going to do it anyway sometimes. So right now, given the forecast, given what we think the lake is going to level out at, we think we can avoid those estuary discharges.
People on Zoom can. Right. And actually, if you wanted to step forward, Jim.
It's just quick. It's just that for years and years, we heard, well, we can't discharge because we have an endangered species. But our 27 endangered species never got considered.
That's okay. Okay.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And so right now, we have been working with Fish and Wildlife to get around the Cape Sable seaside sparrow. That's the endangered species I assume you're referring to. And we're in a good spot. All the 12s are open. We just finished a seepage wall down there, which after Hurricane Ian, without having done that seepage wall, it would have shut down flows in the Everglades National Park. But because we have that seepage wall in there, we didn't have to shut down those flows. So, you know, getting that infrastructure, which we knew was important, was critical. And so now we've got a lot of water moving into Everglades National Park, despite endangered species.
Drew, thank you for coming. I'm glad to hear your presentation because it is a little bit of a different message than what was portrayed to us on the periodic scientist call a couple days ago, hosted by the Corps. And as Mark Perry said, that alluded to giving us a choice of discharges, you know, over the next few months to preempt a potential situation where we might have a harmful algal bloom in the lake and then preempt necessary discharges then. So one, I thank you for your presentation that from the district's perspective, we don't need discharges right now. But my question is, would you be evaluating the situation differently if the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee estuary, or specifically the St. Lucie estuary, had a consent decree similar to what you're dealing with meeting in 2025, you know, through Everglades National Park? Hypothetically, if we had that same consent decree here for what we all call the Northern Everglades, the St. Lucie estuary, how would you evaluate that? Because the same presentation with Lake Okeechobee having taken a strong hit turbidity wise from Hurricane Ian, we're dealing with the same hit in our estuary with that turbidity from the local basin runoff. So if we had that decree, would it change your actions over the dry season?
Great question. Yeah, so consent decrees have an effect. They absolutely do. And so this one was born from a litigation in the 90s through lots of court, and there's still a federal judge watching us, you know, on that Everglades consent decree. So it is something we have to meet. And so if there was a consent decree in any other part of the system or anything like that, the Corps and us would just, you know, have to adapt to it. So, I mean, there is a lot of investment, over like $2 billion of investment in those STAs to try to put clean water into the Everglades. And it's rooted in not only just the consent decree, there's also interest in cleaning up the Everglades. But, you know, that is a absolute requirement on the district.
Well, real quick, Greg, and then we'll go to Blair.
Okay, I'll be quick. Greg Braun, Guardians of Martin County. I actually have two questions. The first is, I'm very definitely impressed with the district's both preparedness and how you've responded. You showed the picture with the pumps and identified the numbers and all that sort of thing. I thought most of the district's gate structures are such that you can remove stop logs and not require pumping, just allow the water to flow through. So can you describe that a little bit? And then also, you didn't mention STA1 or the C44 reservoir. Can you talk about how those were employed with this?
So yeah, our structures, they're gravity structures. And so we can pull the gate up and we can get it out of the water so that gravity can flow. Those structures are designed for like a 1 in 10 storm event. And so they're still only this wide, right? So when we put pumps in there, we keep the structure open so it all can continue to go through there, but then we pump around them to get additional water out of those lakes in addition to the gates. So yeah, so the gates are wide open. We had gates wide open, and we even have lock systems. So we just opened them and let it flow through locks, to get and close the locks to public access. But to get locks, used for flood control purposes. So that's why we had to deploy pumps to get it around a structure that could only convey so much, right? They were still conveying what it could, but we needed more. And then, so the C43 is still under construction. It can't take water right now. You asked about the C44 and A1. A1 FEB was filled up completely. So that was filled up, and then all the rest of the water goes into the SDAs directly and filled them up. And so, yeah, and now I'll get there. Yeah. And so that's where the A1 FEB was. And then the C44 reservoir, once we saw that the rain in the basin, the C44 basin was causing S80 discharges, we immediately gave the orders to turn on the pumps on the C44 reservoir. All pumps were utilized, pumped into the reservoir, which ended up closing the S80 quicker. It was still 1,500 going to the reservoir, some going out the S80 until we gained control of that system itself. So the S80 could close first, and then we continued to pump in the C44 until we controlled that rainwater.
Blair, real quick, and then Gil, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, and he'll be available later.
Come on.
Blair Wickstrom, board member of Rivers Coalition. I appreciate you coming here, and Dr. Wischnecke, I appreciate you and your expertise. Real quickly, just as an overall, how long have you been working with the lake?
With the lake, 2.5 years.
Would it be easier on you? Would you sleep better at night if the lake was generally lower? But I mean, if it was lower, generally lower, it would be easier overall? Would your life be easier?
That depends on easier for.
No, just for you. Okay, where I guess I'm going is, it just seems like a lower lake is generally better for almost anybody except maybe the 400,000 acres of sugar cane that need water, a water guarantee. Because we haven't never not given them water. And so my question is, in terms of, it was great to hear that we might be able to move some lake water into the STAs at the beginning of our dry season, which is November. And we haven't been in the last couple seasons. And so maybe if you could, again, the idea is if we can lower the lake and keep it lower, then there's not that much pressure to really move it, lower in the beginning of the dry season. And so the question is, you did mention that you were going to try to move more lake water at the beginning of November. I know we had a hurricane, but last year at this time, you had mentioned the plants were needing to be repaired. And I think that was the case with the year before. And so if you can just sort of maybe clear up on what your plans potentially are going forward.
So it does all get rooted in, are we at risk of estuary discharge, right? And so right now, I don't see that we're at risk of estuary discharge. So I am trying to get the STAs prepared to move water for beneficial, right? For beneficial purposes to the Everglades and to get the lake into the ecologic zone so we can get it down and prepared for another wet season, right? So right now, the STAs are getting assessed. So I'm not moving water into them. I know that they took a really deep condition. And so they got really stressed. And so really I'm looking more in the probably December timeframe when the water conservation area might need the water, when the plants have had a chance to recover and get stabilized. I need the plants to stay rooted. And that's what happens that's why that one cell is offline on the eastern side of 3-4. It is because we used it so much that the plants got unrooted and went around and unrooted a bunch of other plants. And then I didn't have an STA functional, right? So that was the issue. And so I want to make sure those plants can stay rooted, that we can move that water through and get the elevations back up a little bit. It would be a different conversation if we were discharging or if we were at the threat of discharging, right? I may take more risks. So it's that kind of calculus that I have to go through. I know it's not the greatest thing to hear in this crowd, but I just got to be honest with you. That's what we're looking at.
Okay. So is it the district's position, and have you conveyed this to the Army Corps of Engineers, that you do not believe there's a need for discharges this year? Because that was the conversation at the end of the periodic scientist call the other day, with the Corps essentially asking, if we're going to have discharges, when should we have them? When would be the best time to have them? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the impetus for that was not necessarily that the lake's getting too high, but it was concern for the potential for harmful algal blooms in the spring, and the ability to have some flexibility, were that to occur.
Thank you, Colonel, for being up here. No, thank you. And great questions all around. And I would tell you the reason you heard a more conservative, frankly, or cautious approach at the end of the scientific call on Tuesday was, it's still early. I mean, we haven't hit November yet. We're not out of the wet season. We haven't seen the peak. We do expect it to be at 60.2. Yes, we're talking daily. We had great discussion actually this morning. So we don't, I would concur that we don't expect to release, but we still have to make sure that we are preparing in the event. And so we've seen the harmful algal blooms peak in April, May this past 2 years, right? So we want to get that decision sooner. As we know, the turbidity's out there. We've heard Dr. Whitney, it's great right now, but as it settles out, right, what's going to happen? So that's why you're hearing a more conservative approach. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. If you remember 2018, that was after Irma. That summer of 2018 was after Irma. So we could see a repeat. Not of discharges, I hope, but of the algae blooms on the lake, right?
So if we're expecting that coming in this April and looking to, it would be beneficial then during the dry season to try to get the lake down to a lower significant level, so that if there were an algae blooms, they wouldn't have to be discharged to the estuaries. Right. So that's kind of where we are. John, did you want to say any question about that? No, he's shaking his head. Do you have one more question, Deanna? Diane? Yeah.
Well, I just want to make sure that the people on Zoom can hear. I just wanted, the turbidity is great for the algae blooms, but isn't it bad for the grasses and the fish spawning? So we have to consider that also being a problem.
Yeah, the turbidity, even if it's
Yeah. The lake is not in good condition. That's not a mystery, right? I mean, there is a eutrophication problem, a pollution problem, and it's manifested itself in all the sediments in the bottom of the lake. And when these events happen, it stirs up. So we're set up well to have decent growth in our submerged aquatic vegetation in the lake. This is probably going to set us back on that because it can't get the light, right? So yeah, it's not good. Not good habitat for fish when you don't have submerged aquatic vegetation.
No, you've had your chance. No, I'll give you one more.
Yeah,
Quick.
I think it's really great that we have both Colonel Polk and General Bartlett with us today, but when I read today's newspaper, they seem to indicate that the Corps was indicating that they would expect low-level discharges to the east real soon. And I thought I heard you today saying you agree with Drew that you don't expect to be sending any water east unless things change. Is that where you are right now?
Yeah, I think he's nodding his head. Yes, that's.
I'm saying it's accurate where we are now. We do confer and consult daily. We are in a lot of agreement. This is probably our first chance to really talk about our dry season strategy, which we'll be officially putting out around the end of November. We don't want to, but at the same time, you know, we're not out of the woods yet with this season, so.
And there's no tropical activity threatening us, and it's dry for the next week. So let's get to the end of October.
Miss Jackie and Gil, if I can, real quick.
Since Mr. Mitnick is here, and he has all this experience, Mr. Mitnick, what are like Mr. Mitnick's reflections on Hurricane Ian? Would you come up? Please come up.
I love it.
Thank you.
All right, so you said reflections on Hurricane Ian. Guess I'll start with a lot of water and a part of the system that wasn't designed to handle that amount of water. I think one of the gentlemen over here asked about the structures and why pumping versus gravity and stop logs. So, and as Drew gave his answer and describing it, he's right on. Those structures up there were very small. They weren't designed to handle this kind of water. They're not like the size of S80 and some big monstrous structure that can move a lot of water. It's just a single gated structure. So that's why we deployed a lot of our resources in conjunction with the Corps. I mean, the Corps of Engineers, they brought in a new district commander out of the New Orleans office to assist in Orlando and all of their activities. And they brought a bunch of resources and pumps that helped us. So I guess that would be the first reflection, just a lot of water and a part of the system that's not designed for it. And that's probably something we should take note of for the future as we look at how to improve the system. Is that area up around the upper chain of lakes and Kissimmee area, what improvements storage wise, conveyance wise can be made up there to not only do help out the restoration of the Kissimmee River and hold some of that water up north, but also Lake Okeechobee by holding some of that water up to the north. Other than that, just Ian wise, it helped the Everglades. Drew mentioned that. If you recall, just before Ian, that governing board meeting in September, we were talking about, water shortages and not having enough water for Everglades National Park and the Everglades and the wading birds. So Ian corrected all of that. There's a decent amount of water in Conservation Area 3 that'll help sustain Everglades National Park for several months to come and keep that water moving. So it helped a lot of parts of the system that were staring down some very tough choices. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Yeah. Kudos to the district for doing a lot of work and their prime thing is flood control and flood prevention. So during this whole event, I mean, they remarkably, along with the Corps, responded and got a lot of things in place to do that. Are you going to brief question?
We've talked exclusively about water quantity. Has the district even begun to assess, the nutrient loading into the lake and how much garbage basically flowed into the lake as a result of this?
We'll talk about water quality.
Right. So that involves sampling and analytics. So we're trying to get that information together for the board meeting to know how much loading occurred throughout the year and then with Ian on top of it. Yep.
So that'll come up in I think the 10th is the board meeting, right? The next governing, hopefully. Okay, great. Well, I thank you, Drew, and obviously also Dr. Wachnika. Appreciate you coming. Really appreciate that insight, particularly to the lake and your expertise on that. And our temperatures here in this estuary are rising as well. They've gone from about mid 70s up to the upper 70s now. And, you know, we can anticipate those kind of warmer waters also causing problems. But we're looking to, again, try to keep those salinities coming up as they are now, recovering again from that storm. Our salinities here in this estuary dropped down to 0 and essentially stayed below 10. So those oysters were under stress for quite a long time, about 25, 28 days. But now the salinities are above 10 and they're starting to come back up to more normal situation around 10 or 15 right here at the Roosevelt Bridge. So we're anxious to kind of keep it that way. And again, our anxiousness goes into, let's really have to consider if we have to make discharges east or west, and why not instead put it south to the Everglades. So thanks again to Drew. And I know he said he would, if you didn't get a question answered or want to, Mickey, we can put his email link or a link on the website. So if you have a follow-up question or concern, do that. I know Drew has to leave. He has got some other appointments, but we so appreciate him coming and being a part of this thing. So give it up again for Drew and Dr. Wachnika. Thank you. Woo. Okay, next, John Mitnick. John's kind of forgone. Martin County, again, has relinquished his time, but we'll move on to City of Stewart, Ben Hogarth. And while Ben's coming up, I want to also recognize our commissioners. Commissioner Rich and Commissioner Collins are here, and Commissioner Bruner is here. Did I miss anybody? But thank you for coming as representative order. But thank you, commissioners, again, for the City of Stewart for also hosting Rivers Coalition. Ben.
Appreciate it, Mark. Actually, we're going to waive our time too, just so everybody can get to everything else. I just wanted to announce that as well for Jackie, I was a substitute speaker for the Congregational Church, the Women's Coalition there last Thursday. And so we spoke just 30 minutes during their luncheon to talk about really everything that we talk about here all the time. They informed me right before that I guess for every speaker that they get, normally those speakers come from 501 organizations and they donate at their luncheon $100 of time to that. And they said, well, we know you work for a government, so you can't accept money from us, but who would you like to give money to? And I said, well, it would be only appropriate, with what we're talking about, that this goes to the Rivers Coalition and solving the problem that they asked me to talk to. So $100 for the Rivers Coalition. That's from the Stewart Congregational Church, sorry. And that's the Women's Coalition specifically. So I'll save the balance of our time. We did discuss in Stewart our position during the periodic science call, what it is for this season. If anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. All right, Miss Jackie Thurlow-Lippisch on our update on Water Management District.
Really? I think I'll forego the South Florida Water Management District since you just had a huge presentation, but I will show this photograph. Is my husband still in the room or did he run off? There he is. Ed, do you notice Ed's wearing a matching shirt for the South Florida Water Management District? Sorry. Yes, absolutely. So I'm sorry, I should be being serious up here, but my husband, Dr. Ed Lippisch, has taken hundreds, if not thousands of photographs of the St. Lucie River, Indian River Lagoon. Let's give it up for Ed. And he was out just the other day. This photo is from the 22nd of October, and I think it shows the concerns that we have. You see the turbidity in our river. You can see in the St. Lucie River, between Stewart, where Hell's Gate is, to Sewell's Point. I mean, there's a lot of wind turbidity in there and just the darkness in the water. And obviously our seagrass beds are still there, and you can see the shadows of them up against the sandbars, so to speak, the Stewart sandbar. But there's a concern about how this is going to look after this time of dark water. Personally, I think we'll be okay, because when we have these kinds of events, they come and they go. When we have Lake Okeechobee situations, they may come and stay and stay and stay. And so this will break at a certain point. But right now, if you go out, it does not look the same way that it did just a few months ago. And we should work harder on retaining this water in every way we can. Fertilizer, chemicals, everything that's on the ground is now in the river. Thank you, Ed, and thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much. Next governing board is November 10th, so we'll be staying tuned to that. We have agencies updates, FDEP or FWC, but I know the Colonel's here from Corps of Engineers. Thank you, Colonel, for coming. If you have any comments or thoughts, I'd also like to recognize that they had the integrated delivery schedule come out, the new draft of 2022. So we're all excited about that and looking at where that is. So
Yep, I'll just be real quick. Yeah, so the final will be the 19th of November. So we did that. We just had our server task force up in Washington, DC last week. Great event. And then the final of that, I don't think we see too many changes right now to what we're expecting on that one. So that's a great one. I'll just go real quick, just to dovetail and everything. Was fantastic presentation just now. You know, with the hurricane update on what we're doing from the Corps side, just to bring everybody, we've got like 305 USA civilians. Yeah, over 1,000, almost 1,100 contractors, 12 mission assignments we're still doing. We've done $4.3 million in flood control emergency management over there. As John Megna mentioned, we've had 12 pumps we're still pumping up in mainly out of the northern Kissimmee chain of lakes there, out of East Lake Tahoe specifically as well. That should be drawing down this next week on the temporary roofing mission. That's probably our biggest bread and butter there to help folks on the West Coast. We had 20,371 what's called right of entry requests, which gives us that authorization to go and put blue roofs. So it's essentially a way to have a permanent or semi-permanent a water barrier until the roof can be permanently fixed. So of those 20,000, 18,000 assessments done, and right now 13,700 installed. So it's really helping folks on the West Coast, and we're really proud of that. We'll continue to put them on. We're about 900 to 1,000 a day right now, so knocking them out, and we'll continue to take applications to the 1st of November. Like we talked about on the lake, I think that the biggest point, and what I'll be talking about tomorrow, is we will start a release out the S79 to the west at about 1,200 CFS, and again, that's from discussion and recommendation from the district. As it's drying down, we will probably supplement some of that with Lake Okeechobee water going west. But that's the type of thing that we're doing. We'd rather do now than later, but that's where we stand. Nothing come in this direction, of course, and we don't intend to. We don't want to see it that way. I think the last one I'll just drop in is you still mark your calendars for the 25th January ribbon cutting in Clewiston. So get out there. Yes, sir. Right before FGO. Yes, ma'am. Nothing. Yeah, nothing has changed, ma'am. As of now, I mean, we've got some adjustments on footprint that we're working through, but as far as how we're awarding it, and yes, sir. Yep, no change. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right.
And okay, Newton Cook, well, last quick question. Yep. From on the list, you mean? Mhm. So instead of 29, it's 32 slip.
I'll double check.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what we had.
Yeah.
That was 20.
Yeah. Yeah. Come on up or real quick. Joe, did you have a quick question? Okay, hurry up. No problem.
So a lot of the projects on the IDS have the same start date, but their completion dates got pushed out to the right substantially, even for us with the C-23-24 projects. And it's largely, the explanation that I was given is because of increased costs, which is pretty understandable. I know on some of our local projects, we're seeing 100% increase in construction costs. And so last year when this was revised, it was based on the cost to build STAs and reservoirs then, and now it's quite a bit more. So the start dates are the same, but they're forecasting longer construction time periods. It may be as costs come down, diesel fuel material becomes available, that they'll make an adjustment back. We're hoping that that's the case for next year's IDS.
Yeah, so the two parts that we're talking about, Colonel verified, is like from 28 to 30 is the inflow pump station and the embankment outwork. So those completion dates will be, as he said, pushed out.
They were never 26. I know that. It was 28, right? 28 and possibly, right? So, but again, and as John said, it was the increased costs have incurred as far as what we're looking at, but it doesn't mean we can't make some things up still. So. Yes, sir.
Question, will the upcoming LOSUM be able to accommodate an increased lowering of the lake in anticipation of another hurricane?
Well, I mean, like you're seeing, like, for instance, we're doing 1,200 to the west, because that's essentially what LOSUM would recommend right now versus Laura's 08 going west. I think, but your question about lowering prior to a storm, no, I mean, the plumbing hasn't changed, so we don't get any benefit of trying to dump water prior to a storm. Or rather,
flexibility in
but yes. Correct. Yes. Now for Blue Gun, yes, absolutely. Yes, sir. Okay.
Good job. Thank you very much. All right. We're going to move quick to Lake Paul Gray's online. Paul, you on Zoom? Can you hear us? And can you give us an update on the lake?
Yeah, sorry I couldn't be down there. But yeah, you've heard about the lake. It would have been best if it stopped at 15.5 feet, but considering how severe that storm was, 16 will be fine. I'm relieved at that. And that gives us enough water to keep the salinity to the Caloosahatchee good for the next dry season. And as Drew said, if the STAs can function well enough, we can send some more water to the Everglades. So all things considered, I think the thing, people can't imagine how wet Florida's supposed to be. And for the Corps and the district to be able to get through this extreme event with as little, well, as well as they did, we just really owe them a huge debt of gratitude, because they really did a lot of work. And we spent a lot of time aggravated at them over this or that, but this is a time we should really be appreciating them. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Good update. Yeah. As you can see on the hydrographs, the lake really jumped up high, but it's still kind of, right above its ecological envelope. So for the health of the lake, but also we're concerned, of course, for those future discharges. So moving into any updates, state legislature, stay tuned for after election, which is coming up in a week or so. We need to, if you got any questions on that, check with Gil about going forward on our state legislature sessions and even the federal system. Rivers Coalition updates from Nick Mader. Is Nick out of town? Speakers Bureau, I saw Todd, none here, but if you're interested, we can have a speaker bureau picked up. Local issues, water quality here in our estuary, the map, as you see, is still at about a C minus or satisfactory. As I mentioned earlier, the salinity's dropped pretty much from normal levels in the middle estuary here, about 20 to 25. They dropped down to 0 and stayed just below 10 for almost 28 days or so, about a month. Now they're coming back up above 10. So we expect us to see a little recovery. And of course, the sooner the better, so that it can begin to recover those habitats like oyster reefs and seagrass beds in the outer estuary. You can see number 8 there is out in the outer system, is back up in a kind of a good level for that system. And as Jackie showed in her areas, that turbidity still comes with even basin runoff with our local basin runoff. So we still have concern for that kind of continued turbidity over seagrass when it's trying to grow. Even now during this end of the growing season or end of the kind of spring and summer season, we expect it still to, be affected if we have high turbidity or low salinities. Did you want to say anything, Todd, for seagrass recovery? Did you want to? Well, yeah. So give it up. I'll bring the mic over. Go ahead.
So I told Mark before the meeting, I really don't have a seagrass report because it's, kind of the same thing. I'm trying to get my screen share here. All right, so you got me on there. So again, it usually doesn't show up on the projector as well, but it's kind of the same. The water was stirred up after, or we had their local basin runoff, which I'll show you right after the storm. So back up so this slide right here is, and I can't see it because my Zoom is in front of it. It's the 12th. So this is October 12th. You back up to October 7th, which is right after the storm. So you see the brown water with the local basin runoff. And this is where we were. I think there's a little delay up there. Is that it? Yeah, this is where we were back on 9/12, right before the storm. Yeah, September 12th. So Mark was talking about the salinity. So this is the salinity at the Roosevelt Bridge. All these links are on my website, but this is where Mark was talking about, right after the storm, September 30th, everything went down to 0. And it's been creeping back up. And so, Mark can tell us, the rain, so we're at 16 parts per thousand, it looks like. So that's much better. And so, looking forward to these discussions, I'm hearing about the potential. I hope that's just a contingency plan when they're talking about sending water east, because it really just takes one weird weather pattern, but definitely a tropical system. And then, water's got to go somewhere. So here, these hydrographs are on the site too. So there's the peak of the local basin runoff. This does not show S80, but these are all our local canals. And so you can see it's already back down. So that's good. Local basins are drying up. And S80 hasn't done anything. But looking, this is where we use, so this is where we came from though. These are the grass flats from that old Martin County aerial from 2019 when there was nothing. So we've come a long way and we don't want it to go back to that with a devastating discharge. There was a talk about the potential for the bloom, and someone mentioned that, remember 2018, that was after Irma. So just to refresh your memory, if you scroll all the way down these images on my site, that's this. And so, are we potentially looking at this? Because I was looking at the, phosphorus levels and stuff like that, where they're speaking to it seems like it, doubled in the lake, but it's the nitrogen that really drives this. But so, if we have this contingency plan of releases, through, lake through S80, the oysters are an issue right now, but it's true. So if you go up, so you can go up a level after the slide, so you can see in 2018, the pattern, it was in May, like she said, April, May, it starts, and then it peaks just around the 4th of July. And so we definitely wouldn't want any, to be stuck in a position where we have no choice but the discharge between May and July. And that's the craziness that Jackie and I used to witness back in, 13, 16, where it was like we were stuck, we had no choice but to discharge in the middle of a massive bloom. So the flexibility in the system is big. And the fact that the lake was so low, the fact that we don't have any discharges right now, we were having that discussion. John was the one that took the microphone last time and said there was the potential that the lake could shoot up, and there it is. Here we are, approaching 16. So it's in the risk. Yeah, so we were talking. She had that sloshing chart, showing the thing, and I was, literally looking at it in the middle of the storm, and on the northern side, it was like 19.2 feet, right in Okeechobee. And one question I was tempted to ask them when they were here is, do they have the modeling on this for the lake back and forth? Because in my lay knowledge of how those things work. I feel like if there was a west wind towards like Port Mayaca or whatever, the topography of the lake and the fact that the shoreline's pretty straight, there's less of a risk going east. But like the 1920, and my mom, the historians in the room, the 1928 hurricane, that took out, it was a South Bay, and especially in that time, it's like a triangle down there. And so we had north winds going towards Okeechobee. And so we had this 9-foot differential, 19 point something feet on the north side of the lake. And 10 feet or so south. But if it was the opposite, and then, that's where all the people are down there too. If it was the opposite going towards that triangular south, that's scary. And luckily the lake was low because, you got a lake, I guess at the time of the storm, it was 13, 14 during the storm.
13.
Yeah, it was like 13 feet, right now we're at 16 feet. If you had that same differential, I mean, we would be at 20, 24 or something like that in those kind of winds. Yeah, what if it's at 17 feet during a storm? Yeah, but again, I don't think it's gonna be maintained at 17 feet, but that's, you got that range that you can operate under.
Yeah, we don't want that lake anywhere up there. So we're actually, if you think about it, I mean, they're going to work in the dry season from November through April into May. That dry season, they're going to want to get that lake down and ready for June 1st. And that's where that graph goes in the lake, is to the lowest level. So when they try to get it down to the lowest level by June 1st in preparation for the wet season and tropical storm season to come, they always have to say, well, how much do we have to keep in the lake for this water supply? Because every year from November through May, particularly the EAA takes about 300 to 400,000 acre feet. That's almost a foot off the lake just for water supply during that time. So during this time, they'll be saying, hey, keep it high because we may need that for going into the dry season for water supply. So there's always that pressure for water supply to keep that lake higher during this time. But our effort is to say, no, you ought to get it going south, particularly in the dry season, because right now it's good for Everglades National Park and all the Everglades to be slowly hydrated all during this dry season. That's what's really important as we go through. So we'll keep that in mind. Is Riverkeeper, I don't know if Jim Moyer's on board. He may be out traveling, doing some work, going around the eastern tip of Long Island, and he's either looking for right whales or he's delivering boats, and I don't know. He's out there doing a lot. So we appreciate that. We have one member announcement, member organization. Diane, come on up, and then any other members, and we can wrap it up.
Okay, I've been coming around and asking everybody to sign the petition for the right to clean water. Please make sure you get it out to your members, friends, family, and this is for all over Florida, just not here. I have some copies here if you need to take some with you. Also, you can, for sending them out or emailing them to your members, you can just bring it up on their website, FloridaRightToCleanWater.org. The other thing I'd like to bring up, you should have received an email from Rivers Coalition in reference to the Pelican Island Audubon Conference. This is their 4th annual one. I've been to the other 3, fabulous. And this is basically in reference to plants for cleaning our water. It's not just the plants, it's how we take care of our gardens and lawns. So if you don't have to be a gardener to go, Grant Gilmore, who is very famous in reference to our waterways, will be there and be one of the people speaking at the event. $25 for the whole day. Or you can do it on Zoom if you don't want to go out. But if you do go there, you get a box lunch to boot. In any case, they are so interested in helping to clean our waters that they are giving a free ticket to HOA presidents. So please get that information out. yes, they really want people to do the right thing. It's up to all of us, not just somebody else's problem. We have problems on our own yards that contribute to the problem. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mickey, we put that kind of announcement and other announcements onto our website. Did Guardians? Yep. Greg? I know some Loxalucy things are coming up.
Yes, it is. Thanks, Mark. Greg Braun with the Guardians of Martin County, and we and the other nonprofit organizations, excuse me, that are working on the Loxalucy are going to be having an event on the evening of Wednesday, December the 7th. Everybody here who's interested in water quality, you're invited to come. We do have a special presentation by wildlife TV activist Jeff Corwin, who has produced a video about the Loxalucy and our special area in Martin County. So everybody's welcome. We're going to be putting a notice out to that as well. Thank you.
Great. That's fantastic. Yeah, but we had the opportunity. Jeff Corwin came by Marv Place and got to tour him around a little bit. He's down here in Florida. He's looking to put together a new series. It's going to be called, Journeys to the Southern Wild with Jeff Corwin. And he's going to do it all about Florida. And it's just focused totally on Florida and our situations here. So we're kind of excited about that. And also the Everglades Coalition, we have our annual conference in January. It'll be down here in Fort Lauderdale, Coral Springs, right at the edge of the Everglades. We're putting out the registration information on November 1st. So stay tuned for that coalition conference. And then there's any other announcements or any other meetings or anything, be sure you get them to Mickey so that we can put them on the website. And then we can all go to that website, check out, say, hey, there's some, this meeting coming up, this thing coming up. So stay tuned for that. The next Rivers Coalition meeting is November 14th. We will not have one in December, but I think it's November 14th. And then don't forget the governing board member, November 17th. That's right. It's a week early, November 17th. I'm sorry. So that's a week early because of the Thanksgiving holiday, and November 10th is going to be the governing board meeting. So with that, we'll kind of conclude for today. Thank you all here in person and also online for joining us at the Rivers Coalition. All right, take.